This quality of not being satisfied is at the root of being a good leader, because they're always reaching for more. They're always reaching for better performance. They always understand that a trajectory isn't linear, that they need to disrupt themselves before somebody else does it to them.
Welcome to Meet the Leader. I'm Linda Lucina, and I am very excited to welcome you to our New York studios here at the World Economic Forum for a very special conversation on disruption. We have with us here today Simon Freakley. He is the CEO of Consultancy AlixPartners. He helps drive the annual Disruption Index. As we all know, innovation isn't all high fives and green lights. It's stressful. There is the pressure of building something new, the pressure of convincing people of a reality that only you see, and a reality that might not jive with outside timelines like stock prices or quarterly reports. And that can bring real fear of failure, fear that you'll bring your team to failure. But as Simon's Disruption Index shows, if you are feeling the heat, you might be on, possibly, to a new way to make fire. Simon is going to take us through the most fascinating takeaways of this year's Disruption Index. He's going to help us understand it, harness it, and help leaders take their teams through their toughest moments. How are you, Simon?
Very well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
It is a pleasure to have you back, sir. This is your second time on Meet the Leader. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming back.
Thank you.
Well, why don't we get started with a little bit on the Disruption Index? Can you level the playing field for us? What is the Disruption Index, and what's it great for tracking and keeping note of?
Well, the Disruption Index came about because we realized, having the privilege of a front row seat with our clients, looking at the problems that they were addressing and the opportunities they were trying to rise to, that actually the long economic cycles that traditionally executive teams had had to manage by reference to over the years were less of a challenge than the disruptions that were happening in economies in their particular markets. And so we saw time and time again that particular disruptions represented the biggest challenges for CEOs, and so we decided to study them. And so in 2019, we put a team of our best and brightest consultants in studying across the world 635 companies in 5 key industries in the major economies, and we studied what they were dealing with in terms of challenges, how they were performing in the face of those challenges, and saw what we could learn from them. I then rolled out that Disruption Index, the first Disruption Insight report, at Davos in 2020, of course, just before the mother of all disruptions was about to happen. And so what we found was, of course, that disruption was alive and well even before the pandemic came along, but then the pandemic turned everybody's world upside down.
And what sticks out to you from this year's Disruption Index? What's really startling to you?
Well, one of the key takeaways from this year's Disruption Index, which is our 5th, is that actually business leaders have got much more adept at dealing with disruption. Now, the individual disruptions of demographics and technological change, climate issues, labor market issues, they're all there, and they layer on top of each other, turning a rolling sea into a choppy sea. But actually, business leaders have become much more adept at dealing with those disruptions, capitalizing on the opportunities and meeting the challenges.
Mm-hmm. And where are the moves being seen when we're looking at what's going up, what's going down, both on a macro level? What are the big changes that you're seeing?
Well, there are a number of the major disruptions are continuing, so it's not the brand new significant disruptions are happening, but we're reaching tipping points. And so, it's not a surprise that technology, of course, continues to be a major disruption, but the way in which generative AI has burst into our consciousness, making everybody think about what it means for their businesses, what it means for their markets, what it means for their jobs, that's something that's become profoundly obvious through this year's Disruption Index, and every single business is having to work out how they remain relevant, how they remain competitive, so that's certainly a feature. But also there are some tipping points going on, for instance, in the labor market. All major economies are shrinking in terms of their labor force, and so we have, for instance, in the US, the largest number of baby boomers retiring this year, age 65, so that's changing the shape of the marketplace. Major economies such as China have falling birth rates and therefore falling numbers of people coming into the workforce. And so what does that mean for not just the working population? What does it mean for healthcare? What does it mean for caring of the elderly? What does it mean for the pressure on country budgets as they plan for that? There are some big shifts happening that's making everybody take stock. These are very, very large shifts where we're reaching a tipping point and people are realizing the significance of the challenges that they therefore have to manage to.
One of the things I found really remarkable about the study was that leaders can see that changes are coming. They often know exactly what those changes are, but they often don't know how it will shape them. And that's often sort of one of the sticky parts. The same thing with AI. We know it's coming, but we just don't necessarily know how it's going to change us. Can you speak a little bit about that and what we should keep in mind when we're looking at disruption?
It's so interesting, Linda. If, as I speak with our clients every day, generative AI is probably taking up 75% of strategy discussions, what it means for the business, what it means for the industry, what it means for the world. But at the moment, it's probably accounting for 2 to 3% of budget line items. People understand it's big, it's going to be transformative, it's going to create their world, but they don't quite know what to do about it. And so the share of mind as opposed to the share of budget is very different. $27 billion was spent on AI startups in 2023. $150 billion was spent on the development of large language models, but people still haven't quite worked out what it means for their business. And so I would say that this is probably the number one issue on chief executives' minds. When we did our disruption index this year, we asked people what is the biggest opportunity, what is the biggest challenge. I expect them to say this is the biggest challenge. In fact, the majority of CEOs said it was their number one opportunity. So I think people are leaning into it, but the really smart CEOs are understanding what is the business problem they're trying to address with this technology, not just how to use this shiny new object.
Mm-hmm. And also sort of taking action on it.
Yes, well, one of the things that profoundly comes out of our study, and certainly out of my experience over the years, is that the best CEOs do it nearly right, but do it now. They prioritize pace over perfection. And at a time like this when things are moving so quickly, that is a real survival skill for CEOs.
You said that leaders are getting better at handling disruption, and certainly many of the people that were polled in your survey were saying, hey, we're seeing a little bit less. There was a little bit less last year and the year before. What is it? What's happened that's helped CEOs be a little bit more attuned to moving with all these shifts?
Well, I think for those CEOs that led their companies through the pandemic, everything since the pandemic feels more manageable. It's just such a profound challenge for every business leader. The anxiety they demonstrated through our surveys during the pandemic evidenced that. But as the pandemic has slipped away, certainly in terms of effect on business and now somewhat in the public consciousness, CEOs feel more confident in dealing with disruption. We've seen year after year since the peak of the pandemic that CEOs have felt more confident to lean into these disruptions and see the opportunity, not just the challenge. So I think it's partly a survival instinct that's done it, but we also shouldn't lose track of the fact that in the last 10 years, the average tenure of a CEO in an S&P 500 company has dropped from 7 years to 4.7 years. So there's been an acceleration of turnover of executives. I think that the demands on CEOs now are greater than ever. I think the burnout challenge is more significant than ever. And so that's manifesting itself in terms of tenure. But those CEOs sitting in their seats are doing a better job of rising to the disruption. But no, almost all of them say they're going to have to fundamentally change their business models in the next 3 years. Over a third of them say they have to change their business models in the next 12 months.
Sure. Let's dig into that a little bit because there was a couple really, really startling statistics. One is that 63% of CEOs say that they're afraid their company won't be able to keep up with the pace of disruption. That's from the index. And then 58% say that they personally feel that they're falling behind on knowledge and skills. Are they being too hard on themselves?
I don't think they are being too hard on themselves. I think they're being realistic. And of course, it was never possible for a CEO to run every single aspect of an enterprise. But I think even more so now with the pace of digital innovation, very, very few CEOs are actually digital natives. They're trying very hard indeed to become digitally fluent. And the way that most CEOs do that is by having teams around them that really are full-time engaged in these developments and understand them. So having the right people in the team is almost more important than the CEO understanding it themselves. But the statistics you just quoted evidence the fact that CEOs probably being at the very pointy end of these issues understand the speed at which these issues are developing and feel the anxiety of maybe not keeping up. Now, interestingly enough, of course, it's a bit like a skyscraper. If you stand right at the top of the skyscraper, you feel the building sway in a way that you don't if you're halfway down the building or certainly at the bottom. And it's a little bit like that for CEOs. They're at the top of their building. They feel the forces of the wind and the swaying of the building. Others maybe lower down the organization don't see or feel that. And so the CEOs really are the canary in the coal mine in this respect. And I think what you see through these results is the anxiety they feel as they fear not keeping up.
And I think what strikes me too is that this sense of anxiety, this sense of pressure, is sometimes a symptom of just paying attention. Do I have that right?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And of course, that's somewhat what the CEO is paid for. The CEO is paid to worry about everything and then work out what are the few things that they can really lean into and make a difference on. So I think the positioning of a CEO in the enterprise gives them that bird's eye view, and they have to then shrink or narrow their focus onto the things that can really make a difference. And I would say that's one of the features of the best CEOs, their ability to have a 360-degree view of what's going on and then choose with laser focus on those things that will move the enterprise forward. I somewhat joke that we should rename our disruption index the anxiety index, because that is how CEOs typically express their concerns about what they see. But in our 5th disruption index just published, what we've identified is about 8% of companies that we call the superstars. And the superstars are those companies who manage to grow not just revenues, but also profits. And when you study those, as we have done, the 8%, the companies that are really growing fast and are very profitable, they're facing many of the same market pressures. They're facing all of the same disruptions, but it's the choices they make and the pace at which they move to action that actually sets them apart in terms of performance.
And with anxiety, right, and how can we make it constructive? Clearly, it can be a focuser. It can be something that can help you prioritize and pay attention. How can leaders make sure that they're making their anxiety constructive for their team, for their organization?
Well, part of it, I think, is experience, is understanding that actually you can't worry about everything and you certainly can't solve everything. So the ability to choose where to focus effort and investment is critical to a CEO's success. So I think whether they realize that themselves or whether they're helped with, a coterie of experienced advisors to do that, then that's the outcome that everybody is looking for. And of course, there is so much to worry about, but one can't get distracted or indeed paralyzed by that. Is what are the 2 or 3 things, because it really is the 2 or 3 things that form the essence of a differentiated and distinctive strategy that, well executed, can actually drive an enterprise forward. And one of the things that's become profoundly obvious, not just through our disruption work, but also through our client experience, is actually that there are very, very few, in fact, I've never met one, a perfect strategy, that actually the companies that do the best are those that execute a strategy well rather than one that has the perfect strategy, because that's elusive. And so the execution of a good strategy will beat a perfect strategy poorly implemented every single time. And as we stare at these 8% superstar companies, this is a feature of what they do. They do it nearly right, they do it now. And also, they never make themselves a hostage to a previous strategy. They look at most current data and analytics, and they will pivot their strategy to meet those new conditions.
How can teams better align with the nature of change, right? We're talking about, hey, it's really not aligning with something just, to the letter for the sake of doing it. You need to iterate, you need to change. There's going to be anxieties over these things. What struck me is that there's a statistic in there that offices that saw themselves as disruptors were more likely to have anxiety over things like job loss, other types of change. Change is uncertain. But in a lot of cases, the uncertainty is a symptom of the fact that you are building and you are pioneering and you're going into something new. How can we help people understand that change comes with it certain things that are uncomfortable?
These things have been true, Linda, long before artificial intelligence or any other feature of the current opportunities or challenges. And this is what we're really talking about, is what makes a good leader. A good leader creates followership. How does the person create followership? They sketch a vision of what's possible. They show what some of the basic building blocks are to make that vision not just attractive but also possible. It's purposeful and it's possible, and give people a sense of confidence to how they can really lean into the fulfillment of that strategy. These are basic leadership qualities. I often say that chief executives have to be their own chief communication officers. Their ability to create a picture of the future, create a sense of possibility that actually is a viable strategy, and then carry people in the fulfillment of executing that strategy. These are basic leadership qualities. And I would say out of all of the things that we look at, the common denominator of the most successful companies is the quality of leadership. Do they worry about all sorts of things? Of course they do. It's human nature. Should they worry about all sorts of things? They probably should. The ability to then really focus, narrow down to the 2 to 3 things that are critically going to make a difference in the implementation of a differentiated strategy, and therefore become a standout in their market, are the features of the best leaders. They're the features of the best companies.
And if I'm a leader listening to this and I want to be amongst those who are really, really good at bringing people along, really good at explaining to people the vision, where we're going, so that they kind of come with us and change with us, because things have to iterate, things have to go. What are some steps that I should take? What are examples that you've seen of people who are communicating or putting mechanisms in place where people know what the vision is?
I would say 3 things. I think that because, of course, all business strategies have to be enabled by human beings, all of us want whatever we're doing to be purposeful. So I think the first thing to do is to show that the strategy is purposeful. This is a purposeful use of your time, of your career, of your life. So it's a worthy thing for us all to be investing our time in. So number 1, they have to be able to sketch a purposeful strategy. Secondly, they have to be able to show that that strategy is possible. So it's not a pipe dream. It's something that might be bold, but it's possible. And then to be able to give illustrations of why it's possible, to make people understand that this is not just jumping into a void. This is a journey that can be traveled successfully. And then finally, and possibly even most importantly, a leader has to be authentic. The leader has to, in their own way, which can be quite different to others, they have to be authentic. So because human beings are smart, and they understand whether they're being told the truth, they understand whether somebody is grounded in reality, and they read the authenticity of a leader through their communications. And so a purposeful strategy that's possible, articulated in an authentic way, to me are the common denominators of what I see as being the most successful leaders and the most successful companies.
If I'm a leader listening to this and I want to make sure that my team can be as innovative as possible, and I'm considering either a remote workplace or a hybrid workplace, what should I keep in mind? Is there a framework now that we've got all this, we've got all these case studies, all these best practices we've seen over the last few years? What should I be putting in place to make sure that I'm really driving the innovation and getting the collaboration that I need to? What needs to be put in place? What are those ingredients?
Well, connectivity, of course, is so important. The connectivity is possible, of course, virtually as well as in person. But for those jobs that represent careers where one becomes masterful by working alongside others who are further along in their career and are masterful, our own firm, for instance, we're an experienced model, we're experienced consultants. And so the way that people learn is not just through their MBAs and other qualifications, but by working alongside senior professionals. So having enough in-person time for many roles is very important. Now, we've landed on a 3-day-a-week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And then, if people are in on Fridays or Mondays, that's great, but they don't need to be in. Many of our people, of course, are out at client sites in any event, but that works for us. But every single enterprise has to work out what is right for them. But in so many jobs where it's an apprenticeship model, where we learn to be masterful by observing and working alongside masterful people, creating enough opportunities for that interaction to happen is so important. And every single business leader, I think, is still grappling with that. I happen to think that we haven't fully landed yet in terms of what new normal is. I think it might take us a number of years to do that. Obviously, post-pandemic, there's been a very tight labour market and an even tighter skills market. So as companies have competed against each other to get labour, a lot of jobs have been made available on a fully or partially remote basis as a way of attracting people to join. As the labor market frees up, the skill market loosens, I think that enterprises will be asking people to be in person a little more than they have.
There is a great breakdown in the index about 5 great things that technology leaders do differently. Can you take us through those?
Yes. Well, I mean, just in no particular order. What we found is that not just technology companies and technology leaders, but particularly so, they understand how to use that technology to their advantage, how to use it to disrupt their markets and actually create competitive advantage. So let me give you an example. A number of our retail clients, the most powerful lever that they have to drive profitability is pricing. And by using analytics, by using generative AI to have a very dynamic pricing model, they can be forever changing the prices of things based on, the metadata and understanding buying preferences to optimize their revenue line. Now, because they've studied this and they're fluent in it, they are able to use, to that example, dynamic pricing informed by generative AI to really outperform their competitors. So their facility in it and confidence in it, drives great outcomes. They're also willing not to become a hostage of any particular technology or particular platform. I was with a client recently who spent £700 million converting onto a particular platform. I won't say the platform. They're, almost at the end of the transformation, only to realize that when they arrive at the end, they'll have to do it all again because the technology is so comprehensively evolved since they started their journey that now there's a much more efficient and actually much less costly way of trying to create that technology platform. So the confidence to be able to pivot on the back of not just new information but new technologies also marks out as a hallmark the ways in which technology leaders make this work to their advantage. I think years ago I used to be chief executive of a company called Kroll before I was at AlixPartners, and Kroll had a number of investigative and security elements to it. And one time I brought the whole senior leadership team together, which was about 150 people, and I had a Harvard Business School professor come and run a number of case studies, and we broke into groups by discipline. So we had the financial investigators, and we had the turnaround and restructuring people, and we had the business intelligence people, and we had security people. And we ran these 3 case studies, and in each of the 3 case studies, the security team won. They got to the right answer most quickly. And everybody's going, how can that be? We have these best-of-class financial journalists, we have these best-of-class business turnaround people. How is it the security people always win this? And the security group was run by a number of highly specialized former special force operatives. And when the business school professor on the stage sort of really drilled down into what they did and how they did it, it turned out that the defining skill that they had that made them triumph in these time-based business case studies was that they never ever made themselves a hostage to the last set of facts. As new facts became available, they instantly incorporated it into their plans. And of course, when the business school professor asked them about this, they said, you have to understand in our former lives, this was a survival need. Unless we baked new information into our plans instantly, we might not survive it. And so it's a proxy for business leadership, which is you can never be a hostage of the last set of facts. You have to pivot really quickly on the back of new facts to evolve your strategies to make them fit for purpose. So as we look at technology leaders, more than others, what they tend to do is to remain agile and bring this agility to the evolutions and the implementation of their strategies.
One of the other takeaways from the report is that some of the things that execs valued in leaders wasn't just the ability to have a really, really big vision, have really, really great ideas, but it was that ability to prioritize, and priorities are always changing. Do you think that's sort of it'd be a surprise to people that it's not just about the vision, that again, it's about, no, really, what are you saying is important right now?
Yeah, well, it's dreams and details, right? So you have to have the vision, but the execution is all in the details. So time and time again, what I see from the privilege of a front line with our clients, but also generally in the work that we do and our disruption work, is that it's the execution of the strategies that marks the best leaders out. Their ability to take what might be not the perfect strategy, but a good strategy, and just rigorously execute it day after day after day with clear accountability, follow-ups, not feeling remotely embarrassed about changing course if new facts show that that isn't the best choice. So having a low ego, high performance ego, but low personal ego in terms of not worrying about changing course based on new information. But ultimately, it's those that execute best that win. And in the superstar category, I mentioned the 8% of the companies that we study, the ability to have rigorous execution was the common denominator, together with strong leadership, that marked those companies out.
Getting back to that 58% number that we had earlier, that CEOs felt like they 58% felt like they need to update their skills and their knowledge and all that. In your mind, you are in a special position to see a big landscape of leadership. What skills do you think people should be if they could get 5% better on something right now? What would you recommend?
Well, it's so interesting, Linda, because I think what that 58% stat shows is that actually one of the most important qualities for a leader to have is curiosity, is to be curious, not just to satisfy, but to want to maximize and to understand if one could do something differently or do something better, what would that be and how would that manifest itself in terms of not just personal performance, but business performance. So I think curiosity, this insatiable need to understand what could be done better, what could be done differently, is actually a defining characteristic. And not being prepared to accept good performance, but really strive for great performance. And interestingly enough, what I see in my client work is that sometimes leaders who find themselves as being CEOs of really major enterprises, they're looking at, a decent growth trajectory, they're looking at a decent shareholder return, they've often got great brands, and they feel okay about that, and they don't feel a need to change. But actually, when you do any benchmarking against the best of class companies, the superstars in our language, and find that actually that the superstars are top quadrant performers, but maybe some of these others are second and third quadrant performers. Those CEOs that don't actually feel the need to do things differently to get to the top quartile are the ones who ultimately get displaced, because having a decent return, showing decent growth in and of itself is not good enough if on a benchmark basis they're not in the top quartile and can run with the hounds. So I think this desire for this quality of not being satisfied is at the root of being a good leader, because they're always reaching for more. They're always reaching for better performance. They always understand that a trajectory isn't linear, that they need to disrupt themselves before somebody else does it to them. I often say to CEOs, look, you really need to be your own activist. If you just imagined what an activist could say about your company and your leadership and manifested, all the things that you really hope they wouldn't say, well, write them down, write yourself an activist letter, and then work out what you're going to do about it. Don't wait for somebody else to point that out to you, or wait for one of your competitors to steal your market share.
What's another sort of gut check for someone? All of us strive to do more, but we may not realize that we're not pushing far enough. What's a gut check I can make, or any leader could make, to make sure that they are truly innovating and not just optimizing?
Well, I think that as I observe not just leaders but leadership teams, the most functional leadership teams I observe are those who, once somebody is in the leadership group, it's really quite a level playing field, that actually the CEOs or business unit leaders, they encourage people to challenge them, because as the old expression goes, a good idea doesn't mind who had it. And this whole sense that the CEO or the business leader can't have all the good ideas. In fact, they're almost certainly not going to have all the good ideas. So fostering an environment where, irrespective of grade or irrespective of level or title or position, the people are empowered to bring their best ideas to the table so that the enterprise can capitalize on those. And as I look, we talked about the technology companies earlier, I think in technology companies, maybe more than most, they do have this democratization of ideas that business leaders don't feel embarrassed to pull on. And in a fast-changing digital world, the best ideas are almost always going to come from somebody other than the CEO. So unless they foster an environment in which that they can encourage and then gather those best ideas, they're going to lose out to their competitors. So I would say having a culture that encourages the contribution of best ideas is one of the hallmarks of really healthy organizations.
Another interesting insight from the report is that there's a little bit of a gap between the innovation and the sense of disruption and the anxiety being felt by the CEOs, and the sense of, hey, we're moving forward, we're really doing all this stuff, and the anxiety felt by, say, execs in the. How do we bridge that gap to make sure that everybody is sort of on the same page, but also moving in the same direction and feeling the same urgency?
Well, I think it's back to this point as to the responsibility of leadership. I think that, leaders right on the front line of the disruption in their industry, not just their business, will maybe see things that others won't. And so they have to be able to narrate that. They have to be able to narrate from the front line some of the things that they are concerned about, challenges they see coming, opportunities they see others capitalizing on that maybe their company hasn't. And so you're right, the disruption index, which, as you know, came out of not just a whole body of study, but also 3,000 individual interviews of senior executives, chief executives around the world, that wherever we asked, whichever industry, whichever geography, the chief executives were more anxious about these things than others lower down the organization. So it puts a real responsibility onto the senior leaders to narrate to the organization what they're seeing, narrate to the organization what the runes that they're reading, and to try and get the best thinking from the enterprise as to how to respond to that. So once again, it's so important that chief executives are not just great communicators, but are also great listeners. They have the ability to ask good questions and then listen really carefully and try and gather from their teams the best thinking, because often, almost always, group heroics will beat individual heroics. And so trying to develop a culture of group heroics is what we see often marks out the best companies.
We talk about being able to be agile and be disruptive. What are these qualities? And the index does sort of break it down. What are the qualities of businesses that are prepared to be disruptive, are prepared to move quickly, are prepared to adapt? What do they have, and what do they need to have in place in terms of the finances, in terms of being able to move quickly with decisions? What are those qualities?
Well, one of the most important things we say is that to the extent that you can keep your costs variable, it enables you to make very quick course corrections. And so we advise our clients to the extent possible, to move fixed costs into variable costs. So rather than buying things, leasing things, rather than putting themselves in a position of having all of their labor force on permanent contracts, maybe having some contracting resource or some outsourced resource, thinking about having some services provided on a pay-by-the-drink basis rather than having it all in-house. So the ability to keep costs as flexible as possible is one of the things. The second thing that I'd point out is the people that often are able to act on their best opportunities are people that have the flexibility in their liquidity to do it. So selling non-core assets so that there's cash on the balance sheet, consolidating assets down such that there are the borrowing facilities in place to be able to take advantage of a special opportunity when it comes along. So people that really understand what are the assets and the businesses that are making the most of their money, divesting of those assets and those businesses that are not primary, and to ensure that they have the borrowing capacity and the cash on hand to move on special opportunities, or be bold in terms of M&A to capitalize and double down on those primary activities. So having balance sheet flexibility with access to cash is really important. And then I would say that people who are simply not afraid to do a radical change in strategy if their reading of the market requires them to do it, because market shifts can happen very quickly. And of course, if they have kept their costs as variable as possible, if they do have borrowing capacity and cash on their balance sheet, they can make these pivots really quite quickly without completely destabilizing the corporation. So these are some of the things that I see people doing that really are able to navigate through these uncertain times and then capitalize on the opportunities that are presented to them.
And you talked a little bit too about decision making and how agile teams really need to be prepared to make decisions quickly. What does that mean for the format of the team? Or if we're looking at some block and tackle stuff that needs to be in place to make sure that decisions can be made quickly, what should be there?
So one of the great advantages, Linda, of course, now with these analytical tools, very broadly available, is that if you have the data, even if the data isn't perfect, if it isn't scrubbed, or even if it's in separate forms and formats in different places, the ability to use the data that we have to make better decisions. So, if you're a manager within an organization, is actually saying, rather than just using some of the more traditional forecasting methods, how can we use the data to tell us, to spot pattern recognition, to tell us maybe some different ways of thinking about it? And so a practical example would be, we go to the budget cycle every year, and people do a budget. They might have a base case, they might have a stretch case, they might have a worst case. But actually, with analytical tools that are now readily available, you can do an unlimited amount of scenarios, planned scenarios, so that actually when circumstances change, you're not thinking about it for the first time. You've actually done an alphabet soup of different scenarios to work out what you might do. So I think what every manager or an organization can do is to use their data, use some pretty basic analytical tools, not just ChatGPT, but there's stuff that's available. You can get a Microsoft Pilot license commercially, of course, for a relatively small amount of money now, and to use your data to make the best predictions, which will then inform your choices. And interestingly enough, what I'm seeing time and time again is that the winners are not the people with the best large language models. They're the people with the best data. And the best data doesn't mean it's the most perfect data. It just means the richest data. And of course, the tools now are very adept at importing data in different forms and formats. It doesn't have to be scrubbed in one data lake to actually inform the models that then learn from the iteration of the data in terms of their predictions. So using the predictive analytics on your own data is diamonds under your feet, but most people don't do it.
I like that phrase, diamonds under your feet. Let's talk a little bit about you and your background. When we talked a couple of years ago, there was a fascinating detail that I had learned about you, that you are the son of a boat builder. And one of your first jobs was working in your father's business.
Right.
And but I've read recently that you helped a family friend out who also had a boat building business, and they needed to lay you off. And it kind of got you inspired to learn about business change.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about that and how it kind of changed you and inspired you?
Yes. Well, you're quite right. I was at university and I had a holiday job. One of my father's friends who owned a different boatyard employed me over my summer vacation. And in fact, his business hit the wall. So the business went into restructuring. I was laid off aged 20 or 21. But the most valuable insight for me was, as I observed these people coming in doing the restructuring, I thought, what an amazingly interesting job. I was doing a business degree, so I was quite interested anyway in those things. And that is what led me into joining Arthur Andersen, as well as specializing in business restructuring, because I observed these people doing what I thought was really interesting work. So yes, accidentally I fell into business restructuring, having been laid off as part of a restructuring, but observed people do their work. My father, as you mentioned, was a boat builder. My mother was a school teacher, but I grew up in the family boatyard, and so every weekend I was either, scrubbing barnacles off the bottoms of boats or painting the bilges or something. So I was very much on the ground floor of that business, but ultimately a lot of it was about client service, the people that owned the boats, the people that rented the boats. And I think as a child growing up in an environment where ultimately all of this was done in service of the customer did give me an insight into the importance of a customer to a business. And so I've never forgotten some of those early lessons around the importance of customer service and the importance of doing good work and the importance of doing your best work. And frankly, that's been just as true for me as chief executive of AlixPartners as it was working in my dad's boatyard all those years ago.
Are there things that you do today that you would never have done if you'd never had that experience?
I think difficult to answer that question, of course. I don't know. But what I would say is that my father's leadership style was a very encouraging one. Every day, every working day, he would start off for a couple of hours walking around the boatyard and chatting to every employee, just understanding what they were doing, helping focus them, and if they needed focusing, listening to the problems they were having with whatever they were doing, giving his view as to how they might go about that. And so as a child, I spent many, 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 many hours with my father in vacations and whatever, just traipsing around after him. So understanding the importance of listening so that one understands as a business leader what the real underlying challenges are, I think is something that I was given a masterclass in myself as a young person. So I'd like to think that I've retained some of that. Obviously, it was ultimately a customer-focused business, so I've always respected the role of the employee, but also the role of the customer. And so I think these lessons stay with us. And also, we weren't wealthy, we weren't privileged. We were working people. Even though he owned a business, it was a small family business, and I'd like to think that has helped me keep my feet on the ground.
Absolutely. When we talk a little bit about disruption, I read that at 47, your life changed personally. You got married. Shortly after that, you had your first child. How did that disruption in your personal life, how did that sort of inform how you look at change overall?
Right. Well, I didn't set out not to be married until I was 47. It just sort of worked out that way. But I did get married. As I somewhat joke with my wife, I married my second wife first, and so which has been terrific. We were blessed with our first child when I was 49, and then another one 4 years later. So that's pretty disruptive to a life, but turned out to be the very best things, of course, that ever happened to us. But I think that for all of us, we have the practicalities of our lives. We try and balance, our careers and our ambition with the day-to-day responsibilities and realities and fulfillment of our family lives as well. And whilst in the details it might manifest itself differently, the importance of leading a balanced life and a values-based life is something that we're all managing. And so, I sometimes, I'll be in the middle of some massive client situation or big M&A situation, and I'll go home and be trying to get the kids into the bath or whatever else, you do as a parent of young children. So I think all of these things keep us grounded. But no, I've thoroughly enjoyed my career, but obviously the kids have been quite the very best thing that have ever happened to me.
Is it also a daily proving out of the reality that you have to change plans? You need to adapt. You adapt course.
Yes. Well, yes. I'm blessed with an extraordinarily capable and tolerant wife, so I give most of the credit to her for these things. But yes, clearly, life. What's the expression? Man plans and God laughs. That actually, we think that we have so much control over our lives, but the truth is we have very little control over our lives. We're just trying to make the best choices we can every day. But no, the rough and tumble of family life and children and real issues and what have you, of course, keeps life real. And it doesn't mean that the one's responsibilities as a chief executive or client responsibilities aren't real too. But there's just a reality to all of that.
If you were going to look back at your career and sort of say, hey, is there one thing that, I wouldn't be able to do without if I either an experience or a lesson learned, what would that be? Is there's something kind of looking back at your career like, hey, gosh, I wouldn't have done this on my own unless this experience happened, this turning point?
In any of my achievements, not to suggest I've had many of them, but in any of my achievements, none of them have been achieved on my own. So the one profound bit of learning from anything I've managed to achieve is taken a village, and that village can be largely in the office. It can be somewhat at home. It can be, friends and family. Very few things that we achieve are done on our own. And I think that the ability to have high quality relationships where they may not always tell you what you want to hear. They may not always agree with you, but having people that really care and you care about them. And is it Maya Angelou who said that the nature and quality of our relationships determine the nature and quality of our lives? I've absolutely found that to be true. So I would say that the learning for me is that the power in groups of people coming together to achieve things will outperform individual heroics every single time.
Is there a piece of advice that you've always been grateful for?
Oh my goodness, that's a tough question. I would say listen before you speak is the one bit of advice that I've been most grateful for, because often if one just pauses to listen, new information comes available, and then what you might say might be different.
So our time is almost up with you, Simon, but not quite. So before we go, we've got these little quick takes we're going to do with you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say a part of a statement, and I'm going to have you finish my sentence, if that's okay.
Try.
All right, very good. Your biggest work pet peeve is?
Oh my goodness, people turning up on meetings or virtual meetings with a large deck that they want to lead me through during the meeting. Unless they send it to me before the meeting, I always say internally 24 hours, I won't talk to them about it.
I love it. The one thing you can't work without?
Well, my notebooks and my pens. So I love notebooks. My favorite ones at the moment are Nemesis. They're very inexpensive but beautiful to write on, and my Micron pens, of which I have dozens and dozens and dozens.
I love them. Innovative leaders always say this.
Do it nearly right, but do it now.
An innovative leader never does this.
Never criticizes in public and praise in private.
AI will make the biggest change to
every person, every company, every industry, every geography.
A safe answer. Secret to success is?
Understand that the best ideas may come from others, so gather them and then act, and act now.
Perfect emails are always?
Short, clear, concise.
And the best meetings have this in common?
Oh, clear agendas, action points coming out of them, and rigorous follow-up.
Very good. Simon, it has been a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thank you very much indeed.
Really, really thankful for you to be here for a second time. A repeater, wonderful. And thank you so much for being a part of this. Check out more episodes of Meet the Leader at the World Economic Forum website, wef.ch/podcasts.